Good evening, everyone present here. I would now request our chief guest to occupy the dais with our Central Council member, CA Sri Priya Kumar, CA Chinnamastan Talakaila, Chairman SIRC of ICAI, CA R Sundarajan, Treasurer SIRC of ICAI, CA Revati S Raghunathan, Regional Council member SIRC of ICAI, and CA Rekha Umashiv, Regional Council member of SIRC.
Presentation.
I would now request our dignitary and our members to rise for a vote of song.
य एष सुप्तेषु जाग्रति य एष सुप्तेषु जाग्रति कामं 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 कामपुरुषो पुरुषो निर्मिमाणः निर्मिमाणः तदेव शुक्रं तद्ब्रह्मा तद्ब्रह्मा तदेवामृतमुच्यते तस्मिन् लोकः शतः सर्वे तदूनात्यति कश्चन
Our esteemed chief guest, Thiru S. Krishnan, IAS Additional Chief Secretary to Government Industries Department, Government of Tamil Nadu, and Central Council member, Sri Priya Kumar, and my Regional Council colleagues, Sundarajan sir, and the Revati madam, and Vives Rekha, and the first chairman of SIRC, Jalpati, and the past chairmen, and the past presidents and members present in the other hall, and the members who are watching the online. Very good evening to all. I am extremely happy to perform the happiest and pleasant duty of welcoming our chief guest, Sri Thiru S. Krishnan, and others to the 41st S. Vaidyanath Aiyar Memorial Lecture, which is conducted in memory of the contribution made to the profession by CAS Vaidyanath Aiyar, past president of ICAI. I am immensely thankful to our chief guest, Thiru S. Krishnan, who had consent to address the August gathering on auditing, pro-governance, and accountability expectations. He is the high-profile personality and is a mentor for the 100 people of business. The selection of topic by our esteemed chief guest is most relevant to our profession, and his address on this topic would ignite to our minds and thoughts at a different level. Our chief guest is a kind enough to instantly accept our invitation in spite of the official commitments and schedules. On behalf of SIRC of ICAI and my own behalf, I cordially extended our warm welcome to the chief guest to this meeting. I also derive immense pleasure and privilege to extend our warm invitation to my colleagues in the Regional Council and past chairmen and past presidents. CA, yes, Vaidyanath Aiyar, born in 1901, has played a key role in the insurance sector till the nationalization of insurance sector. He is remembered for the key role he played when the government appointed him to be a member of the committee for fixing the wages for working journalists. Members, SIRC has been conducting this memorial lecture 1963, and this is the 41st memorial lecture being organized by SIRC, and ICAI has initiated only one memorial fund in the name of a past president, and that is S. Vaidyanath Aiyar Memorial Fund, which helped the CA student by providing the best scholarships in the entire India. I'm happy to share that it was a CA S. Vaidyanath Aiyar during his tenure as the president of ICAI inaugurated the Southern India Chartered Accountants Students Association in the year 1957 at Madras, I can say Chennai. SIRC therefore celebrate 1st December as the Chief Officer Day. Sir, our members' day is the 1st July. The memorial lecture in the past were delivered by the collection of the personalities from the different walks of the life. The first S. Vaidyanath Aiyar memorial lecture was delivered in September 1963 on the subject Industry Development in India by CAHP Dudi, who was become the president of ICAI for the year 1969 and 70. Members, at a glance at this lecture delivered would show that the subject of varied nature and dignitaries from across the country and abroad delivered the lecture, which speaks the volume of significance of this Vaidyanath Aiyar Memorial Lecture. With this, members, and one more update to the, especially to the practicing members. Today, the RBI has sent that list of the eligible forms to the all public sector banks for the appointment for the year 21-22. With these few words, I once again thank the chief guest for this gracious presence. I also again extend a warm welcome to him and to all the dignitaries present here. Thank you all.
I will now request P.S. Priya Kumar, Center Council member of ICAI, to address the gathering.
Shri S. Krishnan, IAS, Additional Chief Secretary of the Government of Tamil Nadu, the Chairman of the Regional Council, Chinimastan Tanakaya, Revati Raghunathan, Rekha, and Mr. Sundrajan, and ladies and gentlemen of the audience, here's a very, very hearty good evening to all of you. And I'm extremely honored and privileged to invite you this very nice evening to the Shri S. Vaidyanath Memorial Lecture, which is an annual event of ICAI that we endeavor to do as well as we can. And we have a speaker here who's Mr. Krishnan, who's here to talk to us about expectations from the audit fraternity in terms of governance and accountability. And that's the title of his oration. Just thought I'll share a few perspectives, and maybe what he speaks would add tremendous value with a few of my preliminary thoughts. So how did it all begin? It all began with the joint stock companies, where the ownership was divorced from the management. So needed somebody independent to express an opinion on the financial statements. That's how it all started. Most of us have read about this. What's an audit? It's an expression of opinion on the financial statements, whether for profit or not. And what do? It's basically an examination of financial statements with an intent to express an opinion thereon, true and fair. What does true and fair mean? It actually means only two things. One, that the financial statements are free from material misstatements. And two, the financial statements have been prepared in accordance with an applicable accounting framework, which is of course specified by law, and in the case of companies, Schedule 3. This being the context, we are one element of the entire governance mechanism, which includes the shareholders, the directors, the regulators, the credit rating agencies, the general public, everybody. But nevertheless, audit is expected to be at the cutting edge of trust and integrity, a role that we at ICAI thoroughly subscribe ourselves to, and there are no two ways about it. But in the last decade or so, there has been a tremendous change in perception of the audit profession, expectations of an auditor, and even in terms of our own delivery and our capability to cope with the changing times. Financial statements, organizations, the way they are structured are no longer as simple as they were 20 or 30 years back. We as a profession were created in 1949, and a bulk of what we do is actually a legacy starting from there, where things were possibly much simpler. We've attempted to grow in terms of maturity to meet the demands of the market, to sort of stay very aligned to our true and fair. But this has actually set something called as an expectation gap now. And I think if there's one single largest threat that's facing this fraternity, it's not in our ability to do good work. It's not in our ability as ICAI to put out great documents, whether it's accounting standards or auditing standards or technical guides. But I think it's this expectation gap that we need to sort of rise up to and see what we can do best to bridge this gap. So what's fundamentally expectation gap? I think there are two views, two parts to an expectation gap. One is, of course, a performance gap. What am I as an auditor required to do? And I use the term required versus what I actually do. So if the expectation is for me to get a bank confirmation and I don't, that's a performance gap. That's very fair and acceptable. But what's the larger issue is, of course, there have been performance gaps which have been reflected in certain failures, and it's a big juggernaut that rolls, and we're also trying to correct. The second and a more lethal gap is actually the expectation gap, or what I would call as the perception gap. So what's the perception gap? It's the perception of what somebody thinks an auditor is doing, what he or she is doing, or what he's expected to do versus what we actually do, which may or may not be equal to what we are required to do. And this, I think, is growing today. Now, in the case of recent instances, except for the last one in the matter of SEBI and NSE, in every other single case, the auditors are actually called to explain. And some of these are inlaid frauds. And what's the other big challenge that we're all confronted with today? Today, frauds are no longer very small. They're not at a transaction level or a voucher level. They're actually management overrides of controls, something that's very, very difficult for an auditor to assess, estimate, or even attempt to detect. So it's in this circumstance that we have this memorial lecture here today, and once again, welcoming Thiru Krishnan, IAS, for this very nice evening today. And sir, I must mention that this has been our physical program after maybe like 2 years. So we've tried to maintain as much protocol as possible. And this event is also getting live streamed, so I'm sure many others are watching it. One option we have, of course, is to stay immune and say, look, we're not going to go with perception. We will continue to do what we do, but I don't think that's the game, because you are working for a stakeholder, and it's only fair that we meet the stakeholders' fair and legitimate expectations. With these few words, I'd like to hand this back to the Master Secretaries. Thank you very much.
I will now request Rekha Amashya, Regional Council Member of SIRC, to speak about S. Vaidyanath Aiyar and about the memorial lecture.
A very good evening to all the members on and off the dais. It's indeed a very honorable moment for me to share the dais with S. Krishnan, IAS, Additional Secretary, Chief Secretary to the Government of Tamil Nadu. Today, I'm given the duty of giving a brief about Sri Vaidyanath Aiyar, who is was a past former president of ICAI. So was a president of ICAI during the year 1957, 1958, 58, 59, and up to 5th February 1958. A doyen of the profession of chartered accountants in Delhi, Sri Vaidyanath Aiyar had also distinguished himself by his varied interest in cultural and social life of Delhi. Born in 1901, Sri Vaidyanath Aiyar graduated from the University of Madras and became a GDA in 1926. Leaving Madras, he joined the late Sri E.N.S. Aiyar, a prominent auditor and accountant in Lahore, and worked with him till 1934, and he settled down in Delhi. He was closely associated with various business corporations and was a director of several of them. In 1951, he was appointed as the administrator of the Tropical Insurance Limited and the Servants of India Insurance Company Limited, a position which he held till the nationalization of insurance. Sir unstintingly gave his time and energy to the activities seeking to enrich the cultural and the social life of Delhi. One of the founders of Rotary Club Delhi, Sir was its president in 1948 and later became the governor of Rotary International Delhi. Sri Vaidyanath Aiyar says, expert knowledge of accountancy was availed by the government of India when he was appointed by the member of the committee to set up advice on the fixation of wages for the working journalist. He was also a member of the Finance Committee of the Planning Commission and the advisor accounts to the Bharat Sevak Samaj. Sir was elected as the president of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India in 1957 and again re-elected in 1958 for another term. He was an able writer himself, and his contributions to the Chartered Accountants, of which he was an editor for about 3.5 years, were marked by clarity of thinking, cogency of arguments, and the lucidity of expressions. It is for the record that the first research committee was set up under the chairmanship of Sri Vaidyanath Aiyar in 1955. It was during the presidency of Sir Vaidyanath Aiyar, it was decided to amend Section 5, Subsection 3 of the Chartered Accountants Act to provide that a member in the salaried employment not holding a certificate of practice could also become a fellow member of the institute. The administration of the Students' Association was transferred from Cochin Board to the regional councils. About S. Vaidyanath Aiyar Memorial Lecture, a brief, it is in his honor and memory ICAI constituted S. Vaidyanath Aiyar Memorial Fund by creating a corpus in the year 1960. The corpus receives life and annual membership through voluntary contribution from the members of ICAI. Under this aegis, memorial lectures are held every year at all the 5 regional councils. The fund also helps CA students by providing scholarships. SIRC has been conducting S. Vaidyanath Aiyar Memorial Lecture every year, and the galaxy of personalities from different walks of life delivers a memorial lecture. A glance at these lectures delivered to show that the subjects are of varied nature and dignitaries from across the country and abroad deliver the lecture, which speaks volumes of significance of this S. Vaidyanath Aiyar Memorial Lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I would now request our dignitaries to present the chief guest with floral bouquet and shawl. I would now request Liability, the regional council member, to introduce our chief guest.
So good evening, everyone. On the dais and all my friends here. Very brief profile of Thiru Krishnan IAS. His profile is very enviable, and he's currently the Additional Chief Secretary Industries in Tamil Nadu with a service record of more than 30 years. He holds many accomplishments such as serving the senior advisor in the Office of the Executive Director for India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh and Bhutan in the International Monetary Fund, Washington, D.C., representing the Government of India and the G20 expert groups on international financial architecture and the global financial safety nets, and assisting in preparing the union budget as well as the Tamil Nadu state budget during multiple years. These are just to name a few. He has also been the Additional Secretary to Government of Tamil Nadu in the Finance Department, Principal Secretary to the Government of Tamil Nadu in the Housing and Urban Development and in the Planning Development and Special Initiatives Department. He was the founder CEO of the Tamil Nadu Infrastructure Development Board. Through his multiple roles as an able public administrator, Mr. Krishnan has demonstrated expertise in aspects of policy making, public finance, and socio-economic development issues. And he holds a Bachelor's of Arts honors from St. Stephen's College, Delhi University. Thank you very much, sir, for accepting our invite and agreeing to grace this occasion and deliver your address. Thanks a lot. We are very honored.
Thank you, ma'am. We would now request our chief guest to deliver the speech on the auditing professional, governance, and accountability expectation. Sir, the dais is yours.
The chairman of the Southern India Regional Council of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, Mr. Chinnamastan Thalakayala, Central Council member, Mrs. Shripriya Kumar. I think she virtually delivered at least about one half of what I intended to say today. So she's made my life that much easier. CA US Rekha, who just spoke about Sri S. Vaidyanath Aiyar, in whose name this lecture has been endowed. CA Revati S. Raghunathan, who offered the very kind and generous introduction, my introduction today. And CA Sri R. Sundarajan, Regional Council member, who is to deliver the vote of thanks. At the outset, let me first thank the South Indian Regional Council for having done me this honor of inviting me to deliver this lecture. In a rash moment, without actually looking at who are the eminences who have delivered this lecture in the past, I accepted the invitation and then realized much later that there have been extremely eminent people who have delivered this lecture, and the anxiety to do some justice to the memory of Sri S. Vaidyanath Aiyar, who was the leading light of the profession early in its inception in India, at least in the present form, as the Institute of Chartered Accountants based on the Act which came out in 1949. Led me to do a little bit of research and read a little bit. But as I read and as I researched, I came to the conclusion that it would be much more authentic and appropriate if I spoke from personal experience. Suddenly we always tend to think that we are just starters in life and there's so much more to learn. I fully feel that way on most occasions. But then sometimes when you look back, you also realize that 3 decades in civil service is a long time. You've met a lot of people. And today, as I cast my eye over this audience, I find that there are many familiar faces, people I have met, people I have worked with, people I've interacted with. And I felt that my experience with the audit profession, my experience with societal expectations, my experience with interactions would probably serve as a better platform for what I had to say than what I could find in a book or what I could find in a in an article or any other presentation or anything anybody else had said. And therefore, I decided that I would at least be honest and speak about my personal thoughts on this aspect and my personal experiences. Let me also tell you that as I speak this morning or this evening, I'm also struck by the fact that I wish I had the time to actually prepare a written script. It is a challenge. The time is limited. You want to write a written script. Takes a certain amount of effort. So the first thing I told Madam Shripriya when she invited me was that kindly allow me to speak based on notes, but you could probably transcribe it and I could sort of give it some form later. But then I also realized that, speaking to a bunch of auditors who are very precise in their language, who can actually hedge their bets, and recalling all the arguments that I've had over notes to accounts and, whether the language should read thus and whether such a sentence would convey the intention that we had in mind and whether we need to change the intention, I realized that I was running an even bigger risk of speaking without a specific script and trying to convey with the same degree of precision the ideas that I have and with the same degree of specificity my own thoughts. So this was the various elements which I thought about before I got on to this particular endeavor of mine. Having said that, I must say that I was extremely heartened when I got onto the stage today. And in a very recent event, in which also got reported in some of the newspapers, I went on record. This is actually an event of an industry federation or an industry association where we were talking about the economy and the $1 trillion economy, etc. And I found that probably the audience had about less than 5% women, and there was nobody on the stage. It was a very good. At least today, I was really very, very pleasantly surprised and very happy to see that we were at least evenly represented on stage. And we will probably get there in the audience in due course, looking at the way the profession is going. So I think, the group of people who hold up half the sky are fairly adequately represented in the profession increasingly. And I think that is a very good sign overall for the country and for our economy. So having said that, let me go on and talk about a few of the thoughts that I have today. Very often we do not value what we have. One thing that we don't value is our history, the political economy that we've inherited, the institutions that we've inherited, and where we stand. We believe that everything sort of just before me, the situation was terrible, and after me, it's the deluge. And therefore, we don't realize the complexity with which history has developed, and we stand here today on the shoulders of many of our ancestors, many of our forefathers who have thought through this entire episode. And ultimately, we've realized that enlightened self-interest lies in developing institutions and developing systems and protecting certain rights, protecting certain liberties, giving up certain rights, taking on certain responsibilities, and that's how the entire system has been devised. When you drive on the road, you follow the traffic signals, though that is a habit which is increasingly coming down as well. But fundamentally, that is where our self-interest lies. If each one of them drove in whichever fashion that they wanted to, you're not going to get to the place that you want to. As life becomes more complex, greater is the need for systems. And today, there is nothing which is as complex as the modern economy. The linkages are all over the place. Every small incident reflects really strongly on what we need to do. I'm just coming away from the back of two meetings which we had with various industry representatives on why the prices of various construction material is going up, because that suddenly became an important issue that needed to be tackled. And then you suddenly realize he's telling you about COVID in some part of the world. He's telling you about rain in Australia. He's telling you about something else in South Africa. He's telling you about the Ukrainian war. We are so interlinked. Yesterday, when we were discussing about the prospects of a particular company that I currently manage, we were concerned about every small issue across the globe. I mean, what is Indonesia's coal policy to what is the sulfur content of South African coal, to what is happening with forest clearance in Russia, and what is happening with availability of softwood pulp in some other part of the world. So all of this becomes interlinked and complex. Then again, it is a complex interlinkage of the polity, economy, and society. Every single decision that we take increasingly is part of either politically influenced in some way. It interplays all the time, the choices that we make. We like to believe that we are rational economic agents, but very often we are not. Very often you are influenced by a number of external factors which you do not control. Recently, I was on the board of a large company, and in the course of the board discussions, you discover, how the same set of factors affect different people in different ways. How the profitability of some company actually goes up through very difficult times for some other kind of enterprise. You suddenly realize that all the people who did not, if you're catering to the upper niche of the market, so all the people who didn't go away on holidays ended up buying jewelry or ended up buying something else. So the profits of some company goes up through the roof. That's the interplay, and that is the complexity in which we see the interplay. You see how subtly marketing campaigns are targeted at societal values which vary from one micro market to another micro. You see that behavior is analyzed across the board. And this is something that we are also trying now increasingly in the way that we package our economic message, in the way that we package and try to achieve that something that the state wants to achieve in a particular sphere. Because sometimes it is not just the economic incentive that matters, but it's a social or a political or some other incentive which is as important as the economic incentive. So this is today's behavioral world. And in all of this, the financial world with which your profession is fundamentally connected with interlinks the whole thing at all levels, right? It interlinks the individual, it interlinks the household, it interlinks the firm. And by firm, I mean the various companies who perform, it interlinks the community, it brings together the whole economy, which in turn is related to social and political considerations. At the height of the 2008 crisis, I remember having read a book by an economic historian called Niall Ferguson, which was on the ascent of money, and you realize that how closely intertwined global geopolitical history, wars of the world are linked with the availability of finance. So that's the way the financial world operates. And such a complex structure needs very, very sound institutions. And institutions are of various kinds. And by that, I don't mean just universities or colleges. All of our structures are institutions. Our political system is an institution. The constitution is an institution. I belong to an institution, both in terms of a civil service and in terms of a governmental structure. All of you belong to an institution. The Institute of Chartered Accountants is an important institution in the overall fabric of what the economy needs. And every sound institution to continue to function and continue to be true to its basic objective requires sound professionals to run it. And I'll come presently to what I mean by sound professional. It also needs sound precepts. It needs to be based on certain precepts. And those precepts are something that your institution certainly has. I mean, one look at your website and it has thousands and thousands of pages of various guidelines and various various issues that you need to look at. And I think every month or every week you put out something on ethical guidelines and the FAQs, and people are constantly answering questions. It's an interesting thing. And then there are processes in which we function, and processes are very important. Sometimes we give short shrift to processes, but we should be conscious when we are doing it. The process is important because it's important from the perspective of it should not change from individual to individual the way that you would operate in an institutional frame. All of us will follow certain steps, all of us will follow a particular methodology by which we try to achieve a particular objective. Results may vary a bit depending on a number of other circumstances. But the processes are important and the practices are important. The extent to which we institutionalize these processes and practices is equally important. Already, I think Sri Priya Kumar briefly referred, it started with this limited liability joint stock company. In some ways, it was probably the most powerful economic institution invented. Because what it enabled at that point in time was huge amount of risk taking and huge opportunity for businesses to actually expand. In a way, it's very interesting to think that one of the early joint stock companies was the English East India Company, which is one of the richest companies at some point in time. You can actually then imagine what would be the scope of activity. Whether it was the Dutch East India Company or the English East India Company, the whole opportunity to colonize various parts of the world was created on the back of a joint stock. It's created, and that is the power of that institution, of a joint stock company. And basically, it was a social recognition of separating ownership from management, a point that she's already made. Somebody else manages and somebody else owns. But more importantly, and that's what enabled risk taking, is it limited liability for the owners, saying that my liability is limited to this. I don't have to pay up for all of what somebody else does or all the wrongdoing that happens. There, you're straight away socializing the costs of failure. There's a famous statement which was made during the global economic crisis that some of the ways in which we functioned at that time was privatizing profits and socializing losses. So, straight away, here is the avenue through which automatically, if there are losses in business, the businessman or the entrepreneur never suffers. There used to be this joke in the old days of the BIFR and the SICA, that they would say that we've seen a lot of sick industries, but never a sick industrialist. Right? So that is often the story, but it is fine. That's one side of the story, but the other side of the story is it's also created huge value. It has enabled risk taking. It's allowed the economy to grow, and there's been the significant growth on the back of the joint stock company. Having done that, of course, then naturally the need for accountability and governance, and which is why I think, and this is an important lesson for everybody in the system, that it's because society has permitted limited liability, and because society has permitted that the losses which you may make through a bad business are actually borne by a number of stakeholders who may not necessarily be only investors, who may not necessarily be only shareholders, that there's a broader responsibility and there's a broader need for accountability. And I think that is the crucial point that we need to understand. Sometimes, when there is an audit of a company, or sometimes when things are looked at, auditors would tend to say that, okay, I'm reporting to the shareholders. My ultimate thing is what happens in the annual general meeting or the extraordinary general meeting, and my report only goes there. Yes, it does. And shareholders are important stakeholders. I don't deny that. But in a joint stock company, the stakeholders actually go far beyond just the shareholders. And I think that is an important point that all of us need to keep in mind. There are, of course, lenders. And, in the Indian context in particular, where lenders, I mean, we do not have corporate lenders and corporate bondholders of the like that you have elsewhere in more developed jurisdictions, and where most of the lenders are actually banks, and most of them have deposits from common people. And that is where it becomes critical. Then equally regulators who have, I mean, that is a topic of another lecture altogether, so they won't go into that, and broader society at large, as I mentioned. And accountants and auditors, chartered accountants in particular, are our representatives, the society's representatives, to actually secure this accountability. That's where I think it becomes really critical. Of course, I've already made this point in the free market economy. Let me move on. And what is it about competent professionals to keep institutions running? I mean, I think in a number of ways, it's very interesting to see the accountancy profession. And I've had a number of discussions and debates about, friends of mine who are in the profession and otherwise over the years. So probably the only purely meritocratic profession that we have in the country today. Outside of the Indian Army, you're probably the only purely meritocratic profession. Having said that, I think you need to then hold yourself to much higher standards too, right? So, I mean, it's very interesting. We used to have these debates. As administrators, I as a civil servant, and I used to be a trainer of civil servants at some point. And I think one of the important things that I valued was that treat it as a profession. And, I've come to why a profession is important. But when you treat it as a profession, then, okay, you have these discussions as, our professional independence is being curbed by X factor, Y factor. And for a civil servant, who's the obvious target? I mean, the first target is, politicians are terrible. They are the guys who cause all this problem to us, and which is a common, thing amongst younger civil servants in particular, and a very common complaint that many people will make. So, and I remember asking a bunch of young students who were young officer trainees, and all that is fine. I mean, I've heard you on the subject of politicians, but you went out on this Bharat Darshan, you went to different parts of the country, right? And everywhere else, there are elected governments, elected local bodies, elected state governments and things. But some of you, because in those days, I don't know if they still do it, we used to send our people out to the, across the country. They would definitely visit Kashmir. They would definitely visit either the Andamans or Lakshadweep and so on. So I said, you went to the Andamans, you went to Lakshadweep. Was administration or were conditions of life, I mean, is it so much more wonderful than the rest of India? No, it was broadly the same. Everything looked the same. I mean, those of you who go to the Andamans will probably recollect that, it's broadly the same. Things are not very different. It's not as if it suddenly looks like some other country altogether. So, I mean, there are no political representatives, elected representatives anywhere in the Andamans. And if they are roughly at the same standard, then the responsibility for that lies with all of us and lies with each one of us. So, in that context, I think it's important to recognize that even as a meritocratic profession, even as an important profession, why the higher sense of calling and why the higher sense of duty is important. Anyway, when we talk about a profession, I think the critical thing about being a profession is that you're expected to be a disciplined group, you're a disciplined cohort. And there is a lot of strength in a network, right? I mean, oftentimes we all think of networking as not such a good thing. And I remember many years ago, I was looking at the World Bank's website. And, so there is this whole thing, those days it used to be there, of the importance of networking and the manner in which you network, and, how it helps your career and how you get anything. But networking is important. One of you ring up your colleagues, so-and-so was with me in something or the other, so, maybe they will know something about this particular issue or this particular problem. the civil service is a big network. I know somebody in Punjab or I know somebody somewhere else in some other part of the country. To resolve an issue sometimes over the phone is much easier. So networks have a strength, and a disciplined group of people who pursue a common goal have a kind of strength which can be used very positively, can be used negatively as well. It can function as a trade union, can function as a guild, but then guilds have pluses and minuses. So I think as a disciplined group, that is important. Adherence to that ethical standards is the next most important thing that a set of a disciplined group of individuals will do. Then again, special expertise, and that is something that definitely your profession has in abundant measure, special expertise. Sometimes, we get pilloried for being in a particular way. There's this famous line, I don't know if there used to be this book around the time that I joined the civil service called English August. I don't know how many of you read it. It was written by a former civil servant. And one of the lines there says that if you're a civil servant, you're generally clean shaven, this, that, and if you're Tamil, then given to a rapid quoting of rules. I mean, I remember one of the lines would say that. So we tend to get pilloried saying that, okay, you are rule bound, you are hide bound, you will not do anything, you will not change anything, and that's the way in which civil servants will function. The term bureaucrat or the term babu, both of them have pejorative connotations. I understand. Similarly, accountants, auditors, if you go to the US, they'll say all these bean counters, right? I mean, it's a very common term which is used saying that they're constantly doing that. But then that's also out of envy for the special skills that you carry and the ability to do some boring and tasks involving drudgery which nobody else will do. So I think it's an important thing that we do. Similar to that is sometimes the task that you have to do to call people to account. Nobody likes a policeman. Nobody likes to be policed. Nobody likes to be told saying, you're doing something wrong and come back to account. My father was a police officer many years ago, and one of his favorite things was that you see policemen are all treated in society like karvepalai. You know what a karvepalai is? So it's added to the food for the flavor and the taste. But when you finally eat it, it's set aside. And so he would make a point of always eating it when he finished eating. And I still remember that. And so I never, throw away a karvepalai. I eat it, come what may. But that's the important thing. That, many of us are needed to add flavor. Many of us are needed to add value. And subsequently, we are ejected from the entire process when the fun happens. So these are things which are important. And when we are recognized by society as experts, it cuts both ways. Today, society doesn't value experts as much as it used to. It tends to debunk experts, and it's not only in your profession. The same goes for doctors. You say, oh, allopathic doctors, alternate medicine is the best thing to do. Somebody else says something. Engineers, what do they know? They don't have practical knowledge. It's better to have somebody with practical. So every profession, there is that problem. But equally, it's also important on the balance. Maybe the battery is so equally, it's especially important, I think, as a society, that they want to trust professionals and they want to cast responsibility on them, and that is a special responsibility we end up carrying. And that is the expectations. And this is the other part which, again, sorry, I did not have a conversation with Sripriya about what I was going to say, Sripriya about what I was going to speak. So if some of it is similar, it just so happened that thoughts ended up being the same. So the expectation gap between what the society expects from us and what we are ultimately in a position or able to deliver. So on the expectation gap, I think society expects that there should be 100% assurance on what the financials of the company are. But then oftentimes you're not able to. Some of it is hidden from the auditors, but some of it may be obvious and the auditors sometimes choose to look the other way. I've come across both cases, but that is what, and when it is revealed that it did not happen, that's where the distrust of the experts comes up. Then equally, regulators often expect that there should be clarity and certainty in what you say. But there is obviously a qualified opinion. Some doubts are cast. You're not able to be absolutely clear and absolutely, with a great deal of certainty, voice exactly the opinion that you want. There's also a feeling that sometimes auditors will take a strictly legalistic view, saying, I was only supposed to look at this part of it, blinkered view. And it is not brought to my notice. It is not something that I was required to see. And you limit your role and responsibility. Particularly if the going is bad, maybe you'll try to do it a little more. So, it's like the famous story of the any of you have read P.G. Wodehouse, it's like the cat in the adage saying, I dare not wait upon my wood, saying, do you jump off or do you stay on? So there's the attraction of staying on with the company, continuing to be an auditor, but equally the fear or the trepidation that you have to actually make your point. And sometimes it's a difficult. And let's be clear that, it is not easy. It is there in every profession. It's not, I don't think we should say that it's only true of yours. All of us get pilloried for this. All of us sometimes for no fault of ours, but this is the occupational hazard of being part of a profession. This is bound to happen. And this is something that we need to accept as part of the risk. And then, of course, audits sometimes simply take a tick the box approach, and that just happens as a matter of routine, and that becomes a little problematic too at times. I wanted to actually speak today much more from a personal perspective, as I said, as a representative of the government who has seen certain aspects of the audit at different points in time. Then, as a representative of the owner, very often government as an owner, and you are a director on a board of a company representing the owner or the promoter, then how do you view a particular interest? Then in a management position, how do you look at that different from the other position? And sometimes, the fun part of my job definitely is sometimes you wear all three hats. And so you have to look at, keep taking it off one at a time and figuring out how you manage the conflict of interest. See Mr. Tyagarajan smiles, I think he understands exactly what I mean. So, but, and then of course, as a citizen, I'm as much a citizen as any of you is, and therefore that's something which is also a matter of concern. And sometimes when we use your services as individuals, as clients, then certainly, that is again an area where we are concerned. So that is the perspective from which, most of what I've shared with you today, and the further stuff which I intend to speak about probably for the next 5 to 8 minutes is really linked to. The other thing, of course, is the complexity of the audit. There was one element I was trying to think of, the various kinds of audits that I've come across in different companies that I have worked with. And I came out with this listing, and by no means is it a complete or exhaustive listing. Statutory audit, we all know. Concurrent audit happens at times. Internal audit nowadays happens almost always. IT audits happen significantly. Credit audits, many banks, institutions like, lending institutions do it. Forensic audits, of course, we know what that is. Field inspections, etc., are also done by audits. And there are many others. There are environmental audits, corporate social responsibility audit, corporate environmental responsibility audit. So a range of audits which keep happening. And which is a context in which I found it a little surprising. When I was looking at your annual report and looking at the numbers, I found that roughly you're a profession of about 3,23,000 across the country. Of that, about 1 lakh and a bit more are fellows, and about 2.23 lakhs are associates. Of the fellows, I think most of them have stayed fairly true to the profession. I think only about 14,000 are not in practice, and a large number, almost 60%, continue to be in practice. But with the associates, it's an interesting phenomenon that out of the 2.23 lakh, almost more than 1.6 lakh are actually not in the profession, not practicing. Maybe in the profession, but not practicing as practicing chartered accountants. So it's interesting to see that almost, more than it's close to 70% of them are not actually working as auditors. And there are so many audits happening. I will not say it to you, but I will not say it to the audit profession, but I have certainly told the company secretary's profession, because for a while, in a mistaken belief, similar to the mistaken belief on which you invited me to deliver this lecture, they invited me to be a member of their, some institutional member of their Southern Regional Council. I think I'm still there, or maybe my tenure is over as a member of the Southern Regional Council. So in one of their meetings, I told them that, look, actually the new Companies Act of 2013 is almost like the Mahatma Gandhi Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme for company secretaries. I mean, they didn't like it very much, but it's actually true. But it doesn't happen in your case. I would have thought that the demand for auditors in practice, chartered accountants in practice, would have gone up naturally on the basis of all the different kinds of audits. So I was a little surprised to see why there aren't so many auditors in practice. Equally, I was surprised to see that the number of students who are appearing for the examination has actually dropped away a bit. I remember I attended an event, maybe 4 years, 5 years ago, in music academies of the ICAI, where they were very, very upbeat about the profession, and they were pushing hard and working with colleges and working with institutions, talking to schools and encouraging a lot of people to take on the profession. Possibly, I mean, maybe it's too early to judge. Maybe part of the problem is what is happening with the immediate aftermath of COVID and a number of other factors. But I think this is something that the SIRC and others should actually address. And the SIRC should also be concerned that, you were about 30, 40 years ago the second largest after the Western region, and now you've been overtaken in terms of the number of auditors by the other regions. So I would be really interested to know why that is happening, and the proportion of auditors in practice amongst associates is actually the lowest in SIRC. So there is, I think, there is going to be a mismatch, and I think quantity and quality both are important, and we probably need a larger number of auditors to handle more and more of the tasks. So now I can see structural reasons as to why some of the experiences you have with the quality of audit is what it is. There are probably not enough numbers, and that is something that probably the profession actually seriously needs to address. One popular belief, I don't know how true that is that since you function like a guild, you restrict the number of people who can actually come in. If that is the cause, then maybe it's time to open the gates a little more, look at the numbers a little more closely and figure out whether you need more people to come in. If that is not the cause, then definitely I think you need to address it as what is the value of the profession. I mean, I think they make good money. They seem to be everywhere. We like the idea that you send out finance professionals to the rest of the economy. We take people within government. We take people in our companies. We like to see them doing the different roles. So I think it's important that that is done. Since I said I wanted to speak about personal experience, I think it's important sometimes. Many years ago, I went away to a course in the UK, and there was this person. It was something on quality management. There was this one person who came in and said that, look, all the time quality management or anything that we approach is fundamentally a question of problem solving. We try to find out what is wrong and then try to fix it. Sometimes it's more important to do the opposite. Figure out what's going well and how do you replicate it. So the example he gave us was that, look, I go to work every day and I do this horrible job, and every day I have these problems which I'm fixing. And I come back home late in the evening, I'm like done for the day. I'm tired, I'm unhappy, and wretched. On the other hand, my wife goes away every day, so she attends this music concert, she goes away and meets interesting people, and she comes back home, she's a far better friend of mine. She does good things, so she's in a better friend. So that way, And that actually, they worked out a theory for that. It's called appreciative inquiry. So if you actually go and Google appreciative inquiry, you will find literature on how it is the opposite of problem solving and how it is an interesting management tool to take. So sometimes it is good to focus on the good because it's something that can actually help. And I have some very strong positive experiences related to the audit profession. Some of members who have given me that are present here in this hall. So let me actually focus on that. I've seen some very crisp analytical reports which have really enabled management oversight and helped identify issues that we need to fix. I've seen excellent reports of that point. I've seen the ability to speak truth to power. I've seen the ability not to back down. I've seen the ability to say that, yes, I have to say this is my job. So I've seen that ability amongst others to actually say that. They brought out compliance shortcomings. They have provided very useful insights for good business decisions. Why are you offering this concession? You don't need to. Circumstances have changed. Would you like to review this? Why are you doing something else? Why aren't you verifying the payment mechanisms because irregular payments could get made? In a range of companies, I have seen in the internal audit function, in the statutory audit function, a lot of this come out. They have helped us focus on cash flows. I mean, this whole notion of a going concern concept, how important it is to actually actuate the idea of a sound business and whether you will actually survive into the next quarter, whether you will survive into the next year. What is it that you're going to do? It helps to focus the mind on the business of the company very clearly and squarely. Some of them have brought that out very effectively for us. Focusing on, when is the money going to come up? Where is the money going to come from? Why are you booking all these revenues when you may not see the color of that money? Right? Recognition of income and recognition of revenues. Why is it such an issue? And when are you going to get the cash? So that let's be realistic on the cash. All of those, and that has huge implications for the company's survival. You may have booked all kinds of income, you may have huge book profits, but you may not survive because you simply don't have the cash. And how do you focus on that aspect? Then attention to very long neglected housekeeping functions. It's very easy to shove it all under the carpet and say, okay, we'll deal with it later. And sometimes, it's the auditor who brings it to the fore and say, better address that and clean up your books. Better see, what are the dues, adhere to the new standards. The latest India standards in that way have helped many government companies. It's been a struggle. I'm aware that it's been a real struggle across different companies where they've had to come to the new standards. Some companies adapted in a year or two. We have one or two huge companies, including, say, Tangentco, which is still struggling to come on board. But it's going to be hugely beneficial to what finally happens with those companies. It's a huge task, and auditors have stuck to that task very manfully and enabled us to do it. So, these are huge positives that I've seen. The engagement with management, the engagement with higher levels is something which is, again, very significant. In fact, many of you are youngsters here and many of you are young, and I think this is something I'd like to leave with you personally as a tip. I've come across two kinds of auditors. One kind of auditor who just wants to escape, who will only speak to some lower level accounts officer or some accounts person in the company and vanish. And there's another level which actually demands time with the higher management and says, look, I want to bring these issues to your notice, engage and come up with what the issues are and how do you solve them. And there is true value in the second kind of the auditors. I remember many years ago, auditors can do a variety of things. Many years ago, and the kind of roles they can perform was brought home to me. We were negotiating a corporate debt restructuring many years ago. And then I was in Bombay in the bank. And we were having these 20 odd banks sitting around the table and we were having this power. So there was a tea break somewhere in between. So there's this guy from Punjab National Bank sitting next to me, some nice hearty Punjabi from Delhi. After a point, he says, "Sir, आप इस meeting में आए क्यों? Why did you come to this meeting at all?" I said, "Why?" I said, "Normally all the CDR meeting and all, they send the auditor. The auditor will come and make all the promises. Yes, yes, we'll do this. Yes, yes, we'll do this. And then we'll approve the package, and that's the end of the story. As managing director, if you come now and say, this is the problem, this is what I want to do, we have to think so much. We just approve whatever comes, and then बाद में देखा जाएगा. We'll see later what happens. It doesn't matter. We can always change these things." See, this is one kind of auditor that you come across, and the other kind of auditor is the one who engages. Right? I mean, I've also come across, I used to sit on a committee which used to clear cluster development program. And you would find that the point I found that the same gentleman was coming in and out, and one is a cluster in Sriperumbudur, the other is a cluster in Rajapalayam, the third is a cluster in Salem, the fourth is a cluster somewhere in Tirunelveli, and this is the same gentleman who comes and says, "This is what the cluster is going to do, this is the program." Then finally I said, "Are you going to do all of these?" He says, "No, sir. I'm the auditor and consultant for all of these. So I'm the guy who's making the presentation." So you have all kinds. I mean, I'm not saying what they're doing is wrong. They are actually offering advice and they're helping. But the engagement with management and the kind of advice that you offer, the manner in which you do it, I think is critical. And some of the best people I've known are the people who have had the courage of conviction to speak truth to power. I think that is the message that you need to take away. And then, of course, as I told you, I already focused on some of the other errors. And sometimes the best way to get away is to write a report this thick which nobody reads, right? And give such everything there, and you kind of don't even look at it. I've seen that too. And the good reports are the ones which highlight saying, okay, here are the critical issues, here are the high priority issues, here are the other issues. So at least as management, focus on the critical and high priority issues. And some of those who do that, we've had excellent outcomes from. Then again, the form versus substance issue, all of you are familiar with it. I spoke about not speaking truth to power. I think for an institution, and this is true for every profession and every institution, as much true for you as it is true for me. If you don't have the ability to speak truth to power, then we are not performing their role. When I used to train young civil servants, I used to say that there's only one rule which is important. I mean, we don't have a formal code of ethics. It's nowhere near as long as yours is. We have something called the All India Service Conduct Rules, right? Which has a number of rules on, what gift you can receive, what gift you can't receive, what property you have to declare and things. But the one thing which deals with intellectual integrity, which I think is important, because institutions survive on the basis of intellectual integrity, is the one that says that you're duty bound to offer the best advice which you believe to be correct, right? The risk with many people is they want to tell people what they want to hear. The ability to actually say what you believe to be correct is very, very critical. So our rule basically says you're duty bound to offer the best advice that you believe to be correct. And if you are overruled formally on file, then you do what your boss tells you to. But at least you should voice what you think is correct. And I think that is very, very critical, very, very important for auditors. And that is important for civil servants, even more important for auditors. So let me then go to, again, this whole notion of looking at a slightly more forward-looking analysis. I think never look at it as postmortem, because that's the other risk that you run, because always they will say, oh, you have the benefit of hindsight. In hindsight, you're able to say all this was wrong. But if you can also be forward looking in terms of what is the implication of this and what is likely to happen in the future, then I think people will look at that same set of advice a little differently. And that's again been quite valuable coming from auditors as an index. What does the future hold? The NFRA, you're all familiar. I'm sure there are several views in this room about the NFRA, several things that you have to say about what a bunch of bureaucrats can do to financial reporting in the years to come. So I'm not venturing there. But what exactly does it hold? And, what exactly will it become is, I think, a big question mark. And that is something that we need to understand. The major service that you can do, outside of just the normal profession, is what you can do in the realm of financial literacy. We have a committee which meets at the state government level with the RBI, with the ROC, the Registrar of Companies. I think there's a representative of ICAI also on that committee, and a whole range of others, the Economic Offences Wing and so on, which basically deals with all the petty financial crimes, taking of deposits without a license to take deposits and so on. And invariably, it is about greed. It is about somebody promising 20%, 24%, 36%, doubling the money in 2 years. And the number of educated people who fall prey to it is huge and tremendous. And I think as a profession, all of us have this duty, but the SEBI tries to do it, the RBI tries to do it, the banking system tries to do it. Financial literacy is crucial. I mean it not just in the case, one part of it is the social implication, and one part of it is what happens to individuals who tend to lose their money to scams of this kind. But the other part of it is also about economic growth, because what it leads to is the proper financialization of savings, and that's what ultimately, in terms of investment, will drive growth. So I think it's a much larger task in nation building than what we often realize it today. The last thing that I would like to request the profession to do for us really is, what can you do to improve accountability standards in a range of institutions which do not necessarily require a chartered accountant audit today, but in course of time could require? Urban local bodies. I find that you have a set of standards. In fact, I think it was developed in the context of Tamil Nadu, a set of standards for how local body finances should be maintained. And what can we do better to improve the audit function there? More and more money gets spent at the local level. More and more money gets spent in a manner which is directly relevant to local communities. So I think that is something which can make a huge impact. Similarly, the various societies, joint stock companies are done. As a rule, we try today in government to not allow more societies to be formed. We try to tell them at least form it as a not-for-profit company, so that you have better governance standards, you have better audit standards. But over time, we need to get into societies, trusts and things formed over the years for various reasons and for very genuine reasons. How is it that we can improve accountability for many of these organizations? Many of them formed by public-spirited individuals, public-spirited groups, with a particular intention in mind, but now not being applied for that particular purpose. I think calling into mind that kind of institution over time is something which is, I think, very crucial. And this is the appeal I'd like to make to you, to involve yourself in the broader framework of society, because I am positive and upbeat. I do not look at it as, the train inspector's report that Gandhi spoke about. I look at it much more as, what is it that you can contribute, and what is the good that can come out of the kind of work that most of you will be doing. And I hope that we get more and more people into the profession, more and more people doing this. There are huge opportunities there. Right now, we are pushing, saying that, we should become, Tamil Nadu should become the hub for financial services export through the fintech cities and so on. That is directly relating to my job, my day job currently. All of that becomes important and all of that becomes relevant. So I once again want to thank the SIRC for having invited me to deliver this talk today. And I thank you all for a very, very patient hearing. Some of it may have been rambling, but all of it, I can tell you, came genuinely from the heart. Thank you very much. Originally, I thought I wouldn't speak for so long and there would be time for questions, but I'm prepared to take one or two, but otherwise wind up. Yeah, please.
We are happy that recent past our institute has been closely associated with the state.
can hear you. I don't know if your colleagues can. Yeah.
I'm happy that the recent past institute is closely collaborating even with the state government. Certainly, we used to be closely working with the union government department. On the expectation side, uh, any audit can be successful. Even to our clients who come to us to audit, we tell us standard words for tech, teach, transparency, empowerment, and cooperation. And I expect that transparency should start from appointment of audit. So that is what is required. So that in the last 10 years or so, I am into practice where you see there's not much of a transparency happening in the appointment of auditor. So transparency, at the same time, empowerment should be given to the auditor. So that as they call the truth to the word, what is spoke. So that's to that the auditor should be empowered to represent and give his point of view. And third comes with the cooperation of the partners which we are auditing. So that is the one point I need to make a representation. Second one comes with the collaboration with the state government, the local body. I think each and every project, the government is spending so much on the welfare schemes of the people, which needs to be audited. And these audits need not be on a larger scale with a big firm or something. Small auditor at the local level, at the regional or the rural level, in the villages, if appointed, the project the delivery can be monitored and supervised with a far more greater extent. Because you were highlighting on the students taking up the course and following the course. One thing is number of students coming from the rural is very, very low because there's not the awareness that such a course is there. And second one, not coming to the practices, quick money. If I go to employment, next month I got earning the salary. But if I come to practice, that's quite a gestation period which I need to survive. Long back, being a fellow member, I may say now I am successful. But initial year of practice, of first 3 years, it's very tough situation for any member. But this audits like the project audits at the rural level, if these things are given to the young members who are coming up in those village areas, rural areas, that will be much more fruitful and honestly will be value addition to the government deliverables. Monitoring and transparency can be ensured to the government also. So that at the face, they can also go and face the people.
Thank you. You answered your question. So, yes, I really have not much to say. Only on one point on the transparency, I would like to say, yes, I think it is a matter of concern on hiring auditors. And I think we've experimented with different methods of doing it. It takes two to tango. So part of the transparency game is what you pay, what you play with us, because equally, there are people, your own colleagues, who will go and want to get it in a non-transparent way. So they are the ones who give us the room to play the non-transparent game. So I think we need to have a mechanism of doing it where I think I honestly believe that selecting auditors on the basis of the lowest bid out fee is a wrong way of doing it. We should fix the fee based on the possible workload and then see which is the best firm which is suitable to take up the job through an alternate mechanism. We have tried it in certain companies. I recently tried it for SIRC and it was quite successful. We have tried it in the past for Chennai Metro Rail and so on. And there's no reason, and we have tried it in a couple of other companies I've been associated with. And there's no reason why we can't do it. I think it needs a more widespread acceptance. But the rest of it is, you answered your question, so I won't go into that. I agree with you. Okay. So we're done. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Having the class with us, I would now request our dignitaries to occupy the dais. I would request our dignitaries to present memento to our chief guest. We will now request the R. Sundarajan, Treasurer SIRC of ICAI, to propose vote of thanks.
Respected Chairman, Chairperson, sir.
CCM Sri Priya Madam, Chief Guest Sri S. Krishnan IAS, Additional Chief Secretary to Government of Tamil Nadu, Regional Council Member Sri Liability Madam, Regional Council Member Sri Rekha Madam, Past Chairman of SIRC Sri Jalpati sir, other members present here and online, Namaskaram to you all. I have been given the pleasant task of saying thanks to the program. Firstly, I'll start with the chief guest. Sir, thank you, sir. You have given us a lot of inputs on this great Vaidyanath Aiyar memorial lecture with regard to value of inheritance and looking beyond the stakeholders and for governance and accountability. And the subject, what he also spoke about, taking the new students' data. I think this was initiated in Tamil Nadu by our past chairman, Jalpati sir, and there has been a memorandum of understanding entered for career counseling programs. And we go to the districts and each level of students, and we've been addressing the students, especially even in the rural areas. We have seen, sir, the students are not even aware of the profession. This is happening, and so this we are trying to reach there. And the process has been initiated by our past chairman, and an understanding has been entered. And our present chairman is continuing the same with the other state governments. And one has been already entered for Telangana by our present chairman. So we thank you for your presentation and understanding the profession. I think that you have gone beyond that. You have understood our profession, and you also said about truth to power and a lot of other things which you have mentioned specifically has been, I think it is well received by our professional members, and it will be carried to the professionals to their environment. And we also request you to carry our institute's dignitary to the government departments. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. And I thank Surya Madam for giving her special address. And in which she said about expectations, bridging the gap. Yes, thank you, Madam. And this has also been mentioned about chief guest. I thank our chairman for his introduction, good introduction about his the entire program, and Rekha Madam about the lecture, special lecture, and Rekha Madam about the introduction of the speaker, and the members patiently hearing and enriching yourself. I think it will be very useful for all of us just to go again away from our daily routines, as he said, and think on the next level. And I think this is one of the programs which can be used very well. And I also thank the office for this organizing this good program. Thank you all. Thank you all for this.
Thank you, sir. I would request our dignitaries and members to rise for national anthem.
हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलसि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाने तव जय गाथा जनगणमङ्गलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे
Thank you, sir. I request everyone to join for the dinner.